Good evening.
Good evening. If I can get this to work, I think we're working. Welcome aboard, everybody. Let's do spotlight. Should probably, yeah, let's do it. It's another wonderful week, and there's a lot of excitement in this week compared to last month. We've got lots of things to talk about. Let's do one thing at one time. Let's just shake this in over here. Move orations. Move this up.
Oh,
Okay, we are going to get into our three-step program, starting off with a little summary or a long summary of the Parshah. But not before we first do what's going on the calendar. It's a very special week. Excitement's in the air because this is the month of the Chag HaGeula, the month of Geula, Chodesh HaGeula, where there are many celebrations of Yiddish prevalence of goodness over darkness, where salvation has come in all sorts of forms. Nonetheless, that we spoke last week, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, when the Rebbe's health was restored enough for him to be able to go home and stronger from there. And this week we are going to talk about coming up Tess and Yud Kislev. Friday night Shabbos and Shabbos night Sunday will be the anniversary of the big day of the Mittler Rebbe of Doiv Ber, the son of the Alter Rebbe, who was the oldest son. He was actually very weak physically, but a giant genius, an extremely holy man. In the middle of the Rebbe's birthday was on the 9th of Kislev, and towards the end of his life, it was actually a family member, a fellow Jew, who tried to get him arrested and get into serious trouble for money matters. And the cousin threatened him that if he didn't pay him a large sum, then he would get him in trouble with the local authorities, which eventually became national authorities. And the Mittler Rebbe said, "Look, I'm an honest man. I hadn't done anything wrong. If this was Hashem wants me, that's what I'll do." And the guy was not taking any things, and he went and he forged a note and he tried to make him Mittler Rebbe in charge, and it became a very, very big deal, extreme big deal, to the extent that the Mittler Rebbe had to travel. He was very weak, and he was under house arrest, which was all very draining on a person of that sort of health level. But eventually, on the 10th day of Kislev, the day after his birthday, the Mittler Rebbe was released and allowed to go home, and it became a big celebration. The following year or years was the 10th of Kislev was supposed to come around to become the anniversary, which would have turned into an enormous celebration. Unfortunately, on the 9th day, the day before the big anniversary and the excitement that was building, the Mittler Rebbe on his very birthday passes away. It was in Stalik on Tes Kislev. So all in all, this Shabbos will be the birthday and yahrzeit of the Mittler Rebbe. And from there we go straight into, right after Shabbos, the Chag HaGeula, the day that we celebrate his redemption from the prison sentence that he was put in, and the house arrest that he was under. But it's a big day. It's a very, very big day. Why is this such a big day? Because the Mittler Rebbe had a very interesting minhag, which to us is super important. It's almost reminiscent of when Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes down the mountain and he's answering the questions for everybody. And his father-in-law, Yisro, who wasn't part of the Jewish nation of the Hebrews, he wasn't from the Jewish families, but he came along as a convert and he joined in. He's Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law, so it was Tzipporah's father. And he says to Moshe, sustainability. You're going to lead the people single-handedly? That's not sustainable. We must figure out a way to be able to make access to information and be able to help people be able to connect. And on the back of Yisro's suggestion became the halacha that you don't have to be the leader of the Jewish people to speak on behalf of Hashem. Every Rav will tell us what Hashem wants from us. And it'll be like a hierarchy. There'll be the lowest level, 1 in 10 people. 1 in 10 people. The average block has at least 20 families. There'll be 2 people, 2 rabbanim in each block in that case, or more. And then if they don't know, the upgrade it. But that access to information became something that was a big sacrifice on one hand, because it meant that people were learning their Yiddishkeit, not from the original source from Moshe who had heard it from Hashem, but from almost hand-me-downs. Vayeitzei. But that was an advantage in the sense that people were learning. And if there was something that needed to be clarified, then they would go and upgrade it. In a sense, the Mittler Rebbe was the one who championed the concept of having shluchim. The Mittler Rebbe insisted that every person who came to Lubavitch to hear ideas in Chassidus, and they were extremely elaborate, very well explained, and things that his father, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, would say very tersely in small amounts of words, the Mittler Rebbe would pour and explain and specify and make it understandable. And then each person would come, was expected on the way home, wherever they stopped in their journeys and their travels, to share these ideas. And one could say, well, who am I to explain and to be a teacher? What do I know? Whatever you know, you teach. And that became the Mittler Rebbe's gift. And the fact that we can do the same thing, we learn and we share and we learn together. This concept the Mittler Rebbe gifted to us. There is an enormous amount of wisdom, of chassidus, of appreciation the Mittler Rebbe gifted us with, and the Chag HaGeula is our Chag. In general, we celebrate birthdays, and the Istalkus of a Tzaddik is a very, very auspicious day, and in particular when it's the Mittler Rebbe, where his birthday and his Istalkus is on the same day, it makes it even more special. It's a big highlight, tremendous highlights coming up. It's a big Fabrengen weekend. If you have anything planned, spice it up, make it extra special, because this Shabbos and Sunday is a big, big thing on the calendar. We're going to talk a little about what's going on in Parshas Vayeitzei, and fascinatingly, there's a similar concept in this week's Parshah, Parshas Vayeitzei, the idea of taking what we have internally and flipping it, turning it outwards and spreading it outwards. Because in this week's Parsha, we basically have the entire story of Yaakov Avinu's leaving Israel, going out to the faraway land of Padan Aram, spends there 20 years away from home. He's not even got his family with him. He builds his family from scratch out there, and after 20 years comes back, and the end of the Parsha is where he's coming back. So the entire sojourn, exile if you like, is completely in this week's Parsha. And as we're going to focus a little bit, we're going to mention the idea of Yaakov Avinu leaving home, leaving Israel, leaving Canaan at the time, and going to spend time in Al Shvatz Yarn, to spend time in Uncle Lovin and in Lovin town. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't conducive to a good Yiddish life. It wasn't a place for a good Yiddish boy or girl. And that's where Yaakov spent 20 years, which is the entirety of this week's Parsha. This is some very, very informative, instructive, and empowering energy from our Avos to us. So let's read what happens in the Parsha. The opening this week's Parsha is Vayeitzei Yaakov in Be'er Sheva. How does it fit into what we spoke last week? Last week we were discussing that Yitzchak and Rivka have twins. The older one is Esav, the younger one is Yaakov. And we spent a lot of time discussing that though Esav presented himself and made very bad choices, the energy and potential that Esav carried was like the salt and the straw. The salt and the straw that although right now isn't of high value, but when it's mixed into the equation, it's enormous what it can produce. And this is the power of Esav. And Yitzchak sought to give him the bracha. Rivka understood that the only way he was going to ever make use of the brachas is if the brachas aren't given to him directly. Instead, they're presented to Yaakov. And Yaakov, getting those brachas, will then in turn come back to give Esav the helping hand he would need to unleash his potential. That was last week. So last week we finished off that Yaakov ends up outsmarting his brother and his father and walking away with the blessings and getting the okay from his father after he realizes, he says, indeed, this was the right way around. Yaakov should indeed have the brachas. And the end of the parsha is that Esav is fuming. He's so mad, he can't wait for the opportunity, and he's going to murder his twin brother, Yaakov. So Yaakov's life's in danger. Rivka, the ever Yiddish mama, realizes the danger and sends Yaakov away from home. Where should he go? So she makes it the story that she needs Yaakov to find a wife from Padan Aram, her hometown, from family. None of the local girls should be the ones that Yaakov would set up a home with. And that's why, at the end of last week's parsha, we already have this introduction. We learn a little bit about Esav and his family, and then this week's parsha opens up. Indeed, Yaakov sets himself out and he goes on the traveling. He's leaving Canaan, and he's traveling away to Padan Aram, miles away. And he's going, and his father loads him up. Off he goes. And we read from the Psukim that he comes to the place which will eventually become the base of Mikdash. And he comes back, and he falls asleep in that place. And in his dream, in his sleep, he dreams of the famous ladder that starts off here in Israel on the ground, but the top of the ladder reaches heaven, and at the top of the ladder, Hashem is standing. And the angels, the malachim of Hashem, are going up and down the ladder in his dream. And he wakes up, and he realizes he's in a very special place. He's in the place that will eventually become the Beis Hamikdash. And the rocks that he used to protect his head, as he wakes up, he says, I'm going to make these rocks into a mizbeach, an altar for Hashem. And the small offerings that I can bring right now, a little bit of oil, I will pour for Hashem. But this place will become a house for Hashem. And Hashem appears to Yaakov, and he says to him, Yaakov, do not be afraid. Travel far away to Padan Aram. I will be with you. I'll protect you, and I will bring you back home. Just time out. We'll stop for 1 second. If Hashem tells Yaakov, do not be afraid, what does that tell us about how Yaakov was feeling before Hashem spoke to him? He was obviously afraid. And Hashem told him, don't be afraid because I'll be with you. What was Yaakov afraid of? He was afraid of the challenge that he was being given. He was being dealt a difficult set of cards. He was being told he's going to have to leave his hometown and go far, far away, which he knew wasn't going to be an easy ride. And there was so much hanging in the balance. And Hashem says to him, it's true. It's a very big and important step that you're making. Still, don't be afraid. Why? You're still going to have to make choices. We're relying on you, Yaakov, but still don't be afraid. Because although we are the ones responsible for our choices, Hashem is with us and helps us and empowers us and says to us, do not be afraid. Be assured that it's going to be good. One more interesting thing I remember hearing about the angels going up and down the ladder. So one of the famous questions are asked, angels are usually heavenly beings. Wouldn't it make sense to have the angels coming down the ladder from heaven down here and then going back up? But if you notice, the wording in the Parshah says that the angels are going up and then coming down. How are the angels down here in the earth before going up? And if they're going up and then they come down, then they end up down back here. It seems like it's the wrong place for the angels. Something doesn't stack up. So you could say, well, it's not exact. But obviously everything in the Torah is very exact. One of the famous answers is quoted in Rashi, that the malachim, the angels that were going up the ladder, were angels who had been with Yaakov all this time that he had spent in the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael, but they would not leave with Yaakov. Because the angels, the malachim of Eretz Yisrael, of the Holy Land, stay in the Holy Land. They don't go out to the diaspora, and they don't go out to Chutz La'aretz. But the different angels on the lower level, who were angels that were associated with the diaspora, they were the other angels, not the same ones that went up. Different ones came back down, and those were the ones who were going to be the protective angels that would join Yaakov on his journey to be outside of Israel. Okay, so he goes, wakes up, he prays to Hashem, he gets an assurance from Hashem, and off he goes to Eretz Padan Aram, far, far away. And as the story continues, he comes there and he gets to the outskirts of where his uncle Lavan lives. And the first place he goes to is the well. Just like his mother was found at the well, he's about to find his future wife at the well also. And there stood at the well A very interesting sight. The pasuk describes that the well was actually covered with an enormous rock, and it was a protective rock that was there that was so hard and difficult to roll off. They would have to wait for all the different shepherds and farmers to gather, and together would roll it off and then keep it covered so no one would steal the water source or contaminate it. And as he's talking to the local shepherds that were there hanging out and waiting, all of a sudden Rachel, his cousin, shows up and they point her out to him. And he falls on his shoulder and they cry. And Rachel says, "You can come home." And this was going to be the beginning of Yaakov's future. She takes him home, and Yaakov shows up empty-handed, as the Midrash tells us. On the way, he was robbed by none other than Eliphaz, the son of Esav, but he shows up at his uncle's home looking to get married with zero dowry, nothing to show for himself. So Uncle Lavan takes him in and he says, "Look, your family at the end of the day. Come and stay here." And he worked for Uncle Lavan. And at first, Uncle Lavan says, "Oh, it's fantastic to have you." And he says, "You know what? I should probably pay you. Because your family doesn't mean you have to work for free. What would you like for payment?" And so Yaakov says, "For payment, I would like to marry your daughter, my cousin, Rachel." And Uncle Lavan, the nice guy that he says, "You know what? For my daughter, Rachel, you could have her if you work for me for 7 years. And after that, 7 years worth of work, that would be worthy of marrying my daughter Rachel." So Yaakov makes it very, very clear. I know you have two daughters. You have a younger one called Rachel and an older one called Leah. I'm working for 7 years. I want to marry your younger daughter called Rachel. Don't do me no name changes. Don't bring me a different Rachel. Don't give me. I want to marry your younger daughter. And for 7 years, Yaakov does exactly that. He works day and night. The most dedicated work you could imagine. And after 7 years, the time finally comes. And they set up a wedding. And sure enough, Uncle Lavan holds himself back. And he sees an opportunity to make more money. He does a quick swindle. And he inserts Leah into the marriage ceremony. And sure enough, the next morning, when Yaakov realizes he's been cheated, he comes back to Uncle Lavan. He says, "What have you done to me?" And Uncle Lavan says, "That's how it works. That's how it works around here. If you want, you can marry Rachel also for another 7 years. I'm not going to make you wait 7 years. You can marry her right here, and then you'll owe me in credit. I trust you." And that's actually what Lavan makes Yaakov do. And now, turns out 14 years, Yaakov Avinu is working for Uncle Lavan nonstop, through night and day, cold and hot, thick and thin, and he's the most dedicated shepherd you could imagine, all in order to earn the rights to marry his two wives, Leah and Rachel. It's interesting because we're taught that Yaakov Avinu would stay up late at night and he would have to keep himself awake. How did he keep himself awake? We're told he was the one who originally started singing the Shir HaMalis, the 15 songs of ascent that are recorded in the Tehillim, were originally sung by Yaakov Avinu. When did he sing them? Singing through the night. That's how he kept himself upbeat. That's how he kept himself focused, and probably how he kept himself awake. This is the story of Yaakov Avinu singing the Shir HaMalis. But after 14 years of working for Uncle Lavan, and already being outsmarted and swindled, he says, "That's enough. I've done my bit. I'd like to take my wives and leave." I missed out the part about the kids. Leah ends up having 6 children: Reuven, Leah, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, and they are all born to Leah, whilst Rachel has no children. At which point, Rachel says to Yaakov, "Do what your grandmother did. Take the maidservant as a wife, and her children will be a merit to me also." And Rachel gives her maidservant to Yaakov as a wife. And Leah does the same. So now Bilhah and Zilpah are also married, and Yaakov now has 4 wives and ends up having 2 children with each one of them. And only after that, Rachel has 1 son called Yosef, but not before. Yaakov says to Uncle Lavan after 14 years, "Enough's enough, let me leave," until Lavan manages to convince Yaakov to stay longer, and for 6 more years, Yaakov stays with his wives and his now children, working for Uncle Lavan. And obviously, he's not working to earn his marriage because he's earned that already. Instead, Lavan makes an agreement with him what he's going to get in payment, and it's going to be some of the sheep that he's looking after. And every time they make an agreement, Yaakov wins so much prosperity. Lavan quickly tries to change the agreement. And each time he changes it, Yaakov continues to win more and more with the brachas of Hashem. After 6 long years, Yaakov says, I'm not going to tell my father-in-law that I want to leave. Because he's going to force me, and I'm worried he'll use real force this time to try and get me to stay. Instead, he sneaks stealthily after discussing with his wives. They decide to pick themselves up and leave. Hashem told them, give them a bracha, and they're going to leave. And after they leave, Lavan finds out and chases them. And as he's chasing them down, Hashem appears to Lavan in a dream. Lavan has a prophecy of Hashem, and Hashem says to Uncle Lavan, I know you're charging towards your son-in-law, your daughters, and your grandchildren, and you're upset. Be careful, don't do anything to them. Do not hurt them. As he shows up, Uncle Lavan shows up at Yaakov's camp, he's already very careful. They have a discussion. He goes looking around for his idols, and they part with a very strong pact that they're going to look after each other and they'll never cross over this monument that they set up for themselves in anger to attack each other. Lavan would respect Yaakov, and Yaakov would respect Lavan. The end of the parsha is that Yaakov finally makes it back after 20 years. 7 years, another 7 years, and 6 years. That's 14 plus 6 is 20, plus the travel time. It turned out it was almost 22 years by the time he gets back. But the end of the Sedra is that Yaakov shows up in Eretz Yisrael, and as he comes close to Eretz Yisrael, the angels of Eretz Yisrael come out to greet him again, and that's the end of the parsha. But as you can see, the entire parsha is the story of Yaakov leaving Eretz Yisrael to go to Golus, and the end of the story that Yaakov comes back home, and although he left a single man with a penny in his pocket, he comes back a wealthy, well-established family man, and he becomes the rising star of Klal Yisrael. He is Yaakov Avinu at this point. This is the story of Parshas Vayeitzei. It's a very, very important story for us. We are on the brink of coming back home, and the entire story of Golus is the story of our life, of our ancestry. And we are now poised at the point that we have to zoom in and focus what it means to come back home. Come back to Eretz Yisrael, and that's our focus. So this is more or less, in a nutshell, what we learned about this week's Parshas Vayeitzei. We are going to focus on one particular area. It's going to be the Malachim greeting Yaakov. Now I'm going to say, there were angels at the beginning of the Parsha, and there were angels at the end of the Parsha. Angels when Yaakov leaves Eretz Yisrael, and angels Yaakov comes back to Eretz Yisrael. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of comparing between these two sets of angels. We're going to ask the questions that the Sikha asks. And the reason why these questions are so important, obviously the good questions in the Torah, is because the message that they teach us is ever relevant, and it's something that we could really use taking on board. But here's the question, the way the JLI puts it here. Torah Studies asks us to think about, what is your best coping mechanism for life's challenges? Now, not everyone has the same challenges. I think it's probably fair to say no one has the same challenges. It's fair to say that everyone has some level of challenges. And at different stages of different people's lives, sometimes the challenges are very extreme. Sometimes the challenges seem so extreme, we don't even know how to cope. But what we're looking for is not the correct mechanism, but what is your best coping mechanism? Any ideas, thoughts, please share. Unmute if you're muted. Star A, hold your spacebar down, or if you're on the phone, it's star 6. All day, sorry. Go ahead.
One of the coping mechanisms would be to think about how you are going to really see or get over this challenge or meet this challenge. there's some things that happen in life. You do things very, very quickly, and afterwards you think, if I'd stopped and thought about it, I might have dealt with it in a different way, or dealt with it in a where the outcome would have been far better.
Wow. So is the first thing to at least think, or at least try and
Yes,
think?
yes.
Amazing, amazing. If only we could.
Well,
Remember and
it
have the courage
depends
to
what the
think.
challenge is, and it
Yeah.
depends what age you are, and it
Also,
depends
also.
how quickly the challenge has to be answered, because there are often or always other people involved. So
Cool.
it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
But
difficult.
trying to think is already a good thing. Absolutely. Shkoyach. Anyone else want to add another coping mechanism that works for you?
I have a 1, 2, 3,
Ooh,
and
fun.
one is the best outcome that I'd like. 2 is an in between outcome that I'd like, and 3 is the worst outcome, but you just live with it. And but as I have matured, um, the thing is, I deal with things differently now to how I used to deal with things. So I think sometimes I do make a much better decision when thinking about things. I'm not so quick to be challenging to other people when they challenge me.
Amazing. Isn't that what Mrs. Abrams was just saying? That with age,
Yeah,
well,
with age.
fantastic. Fantastic. Go on, Claire. What were you going to say?
Um, I suppose there are a variety of different coping strategies, but perhaps the one I use the most is sitting down with a piece of paper and writing in one column the pros of what the problem is, then the pros of the problem and the cons of the problem, and then try and work out where I am and what the next step in the plan is. But that's when you have the luxury of time to sit down and think about it.
Wow. I'm going to say it is a luxury, but sometimes it could be the opposite of luxury. If we have too much time and we wind ourselves up thinking and overthinking, that could also be a challenge. But
That's
pen
true.
is definitely your friend. Your pen is definitely your friend when you write it down. I like it. You write things down and you look at it and you analyze it. For some of us, it's helpful to analyze it in a organized way. Absolutely. We're going to look at some more examples, but before we go anywhere, I want to put out that the Rebbe very, very often tells us that we should make a conscious and concerted effort often to try and strengthen our trust. I think there are many times that the Rebbe tells us, don't wait until there's an emergency. Because at that time, it's true that it becomes, doors open up and all of a sudden we found inner strength. But it's a tough time to have to learn to trust. But being able to have bitachon, trusting in Hashem, the Rebbe tells us, becomes the actual reason, merit for good things to happen.
So
Not
are
only
you
that we're going to trust that good things are going to happen, we know because we trust, therefore Hashem will give us good things. Fascinating.
are
Sorry,
you
say
actually
something?
are you saying, Rabbi Cohen, that irrelevant to what we do or what we think or how we try to work out something, Hashem anyway has the answer, and that is what is going to be the outcome?
That's not what I was saying because I think
No, but
Hashem
it
does
is
rely
in
on us. Hashem still wants us to make choices, and Hashem responds to our choices. But I think what I was trying to say is our choices start with our mindset.
right. Okay.
Yeah, and the mindset becomes the schos, the merit, the very vehicle that attracts, that draws in Hashem's blessings. It doesn't answer our challenges.
No,
And it
it
doesn't make
will.
a challenge disappear, but it's an important part of figuring it out and coping with a challenge. But we're not going to focus on that today. We're going to focus more on more things. We'll mention that as well. But we're going to look at the story of Yaakov Avinu. I have to make sure to read this correctly. Yaakov was accompanied by angels, and as he returned to Canaan from Mesopotamia. Did I read that right? I'm just going to say Paddan Aram, if you don't mind. Where he had fled to escape Esau's anger. Okay, that's pretty much the whole parasha in one paragraph. So he fled in Esau's anger to escape. He'd gone down to Lavan town, and now he's coming back to the end of the Sedra, back into Canaan, and he's accompanied by angels. And we're going to talk about those angels that accompany him. Okay, so let's get some text on the screen here. Yaakov halach ledarkei, and Yaakov went on his way, and godly angels met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he named the place Machanayim, a double camp. Okay? That's the closing verse of the parasha. If I'm not mistaken, if not the closing, one of the closing verses.
Yeah,
He calls the place Machanayim. When we were kids, we would play a game called Machanayim, two camps. It was basically like you had dodgeball, and there was two camps. There was two teams. But Machanayim, two teams, a double camp. How do you get from being God's camp to becoming a double camp? So much so that he names the place Machanayim, a double camp. Which double camp is this? So the Midrash actually picks up on this, and it's quoted in Rashi. And this is the Midrash Tanchuma that asks the question, what is the meaning of two camps? Which two camps? Says the Midrash, there were two camps of angels. When Yaakov traveled to Padan Aram, to Ram Naraim, angels from Israel protected and accompanied him. When they arrived at the border of the Holy Land, the angels from Israel departed, and other angels from the diaspora descended to escort him. We actually mentioned this because we were talking about the ladder. He came from Beersheba, and he was leaving. As he left, the angels of Eretz Yisrael, of the Holy Land, that had been with him all this time, went up the ladder and stayed in Israel. And different angels came down to guard him, to be with him as he traveled outside. Now says the Midrash, upon his return from Lavan's home, the angels in whose care he had been entrusted accompanied him until he arrived at Israel's border. When the angels from Israel sensed Yaakov's impending arrival, they left Israel to greet and escort him back. As it is written, and the godly angels met him, the two camps of angels were standing near Yaakov. Says the Midrash, this is called two camps because there were double amount of angels that were escorting Yaakov. Yaakov near the border of Canaan, angels from the land of Israel came to meet him, joining the angels who had accompanied him from Mesopotamia. So what we have here is that Yaakov obviously senses angels. He appreciates them. He notices what the angels are and aren't doing. And he notices it enough to realize that actually I've just now got double the amount of angels. This is Machanayim. This is a double camp. Let's call this place Machanayim. Fascinating. Okay. So we learned a little bit about Yaakov's protection. His security detail was very, very specific and very efficient. And as he neared back the border of Israel, he all of a sudden had double the amount of security. He calls the place Machanayim. He also tells us a little bit about Yaakov, what type of fellow he was. He deserved so much security, and it was the kind of person who knew whether there were more or less angels around him, so much so that he could call the place Machanayim. But now it's time for the questions. We're going to start off with one question is, why did Yaakov need two sets of angels? We've understood that's what happened. But why did they double over? What was up with that? Why couldn't the same set of angels escort him all the way? Question number one. The short answer is going to be actually, angels in the Holy Land are holier than those of the outside of Israel, diaspora. Therefore, the first group couldn't leave the Holy Land, and the second group couldn't enter it, and therefore he had two different sets of angels. And when he finally came back, both of them overlapped for a short amount of time. Let's see that inside the Midrash. The Midrash tells us angels that serve in the land of Israel are not permitted to serve outside of Israel. Similarly, the angels that serve outside of Israel are not allowed to serve in the land of Israel. They're not holy enough. And therefore they stay out and they stay in. So we understand that there have to be different angel groups, and the Israeli ones stay in Israel, and the non-Israeli ones stay out of Israel because it's too holy for them. Okay, so far so good. What happens when it's time to come back home? When Yaakov arrived at the border and was about to enter, God summoned the angels that served Yaakov in the Holy Land. He said to them, Hashem says to the angels, Jacob is about to return, let us go out to him. To what may this can be compared? What's in a metaphor for this? To a king whose son traveled abroad to marry. Many days later, when he returned to his father's palace, his father told his guards, "Come, let us go out to my son." Similarly, when Jacob was about to return to his father's home, 20 years later, God summoned the ministering angel and said, "Come, let us go out to Jacob." It was a display of honor to Yaakov that the Israeli angels came to welcome him back into the Holy Land. When Yaakov returned to the Holy Land, the angels from Israel were commanded to leave the land to greet him. Now, this is setting us up for the question. They all of a sudden are commanded to do what they weren't allowed. Oop, we're going places. Here we go. If the angels are forbidden to leave the Holy Land, why did God justify allowing them to leave now? What changed? He's coming home, and he's about to be in the Holy Land. Wait half a minute, or wait half a day, wait a few days. He'll be in the Holy Land, and everything will be happy. No, send them out. Strict instructions, because now we have to meet Yaakov outside of the Holy Land of Israel. And the question is, what changed? Why now does Hashem want the holy angels of the land of Israel to come out? Now, we don't see angels. And Yaakov Avinu's angels were this way, that way. The question's a fair question about the Torah. You can understand. The real reason why we want to know this is because, as we said earlier, Yaakov's journey from Eretz Yisrael, Canaan, to go to Uncle Lavan town, was like the metaphor or the storyline that we, his descendants, will do the same thing. We were taken out of Eretz Yisrael into exile, and we're waiting, and we're being here for so long, and we can't wait to get back into the Holy Land. And therefore, learning what happens to Yaakov just before he gets back home is ever so relevant to us. We are on the brink of the time of Geula. We're at that stage. We're about to go home. We want to know what happened with Yaakov and the angels at that final stage. What changed? Why all of a sudden now does Hashem say the Israeli angels, the holy angels, can come out to the diaspora? So let's read how Rambam describes this. It is for, oh, you know what? Rambam, actually, I take that back. Rambam's not talking about angels. This quote from Rambam is from the laws in his book of law. It's from the laws of Eretz Yisrael and its kings. There are actually rules about when one is allowed to leave the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. There were some people who asked the Rebbe, how come he doesn't move to Eretz Yisrael? And the Rebbe explained that he has an enormous responsibility to the Jews of diaspora to help them connect to their Yiddishkeit. So they asked the Rebbe, why does he not come at least for a visit? And there were different answers. One of the answers were, the Rebbe said that if he enters the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael, to leave Eretz Yisrael after that is so halachically problematic, he didn't want to go. Now, there are many ways people do it, but let's read how the Rambam describes the ban, the prohibition of leaving Eretz Yisrael. It is forbidden to travel from Israel to the diaspora. Wow. That's a statement. The only exceptions are to study Torah, 1, to marry, 2, and to save one's property from Gentiles who are about to steal his property. Financial reasons he may leave. Then one must return to Israel. I got married, bring her home. I've learned Torah, now come back home. I've managed to figure out my finances, now come back to Israel. Then one must return to Israel. One may also leave Israel for business purposes. However, says the Rambam, it is forbidden to leave Israel with the intention of settling permanently in the diaspora unless the famine in Israel is so severe that a dinner's worth of wheat is sold at 2 dinners. If inflation is at 100%, 200%, I don't know you measure it, right? But if inflation is doubling the cost of food, that's when you're allowed to leave. And you're allowed to leave intent to settle permanently. Short of that, you're not allowed to leave permanently. When do these conditions apply, says the Rambam? When one possesses financial resources, but food is expensive. However, there's a much larger exemption if food is inexpensive. But a person cannot find financial resources or employment and has no money available, he or she may leave and go any place where they can find relief because you got to survive. So you have it. There are three examples where one may leave, and that's the overarching example. If a person can't make ends meet, then they have to go where they have to go. So all in all, we have one reason is in order to study Torah from a teacher who lives outside of Israel. Therefore, even Israeli students may travel to Bavel or to Manchester or to New York, wherever it is, in order to learn. If their wife to be lives outside, or the husband to be lives outside Israel, you're allowed to go out to meet your pasher, to marry, or to save an at-risk property. The Rambam added, the truth is to do any business one may, providing it's only a temporary trip to do business, or under conditions of famine, that's when a person may leave. But all of them with the intention of coming right back. If it's none of the above, don't go touring, don't go sightseeing, you're in the Holy Land. How am I going to pick up and leave? Says the Rambam. Wow. I mean, this is the big stuff, because this is in the halacha. And we can somehow try and fit in many or stretch some of these reasonings, but this is the starting point, is that if we live in the Holy Land, that's where we should be. What's fascinating is the Rambam writes about himself, he actually traveled to Israel and couldn't make it work. He couldn't survive there. And ends up moving from Israel to Egypt. And he would sign often the man who is breaking the commandment of living in Israel. He wished all his time, all his life, that he could go back. It didn't work for him. Later he couldn't leave anyhow because he was working for the king. Here we have the quote of Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Kesef Mishnah, who eventually wrote the Mechaber and the Shulchan Aruch, writes an explanation on the Rambam. When Rambam writes that one must return to Israel, by this he means that even if one was allowed to leave, they may not leave to settle permanently in the diaspora. So nobody is supposed to be leaving Israel to permanently live in the diaspora. That means us. We're also supposed to be going back when we can. And Hashem should really bring us back. Even if one is allowed to leave, one must return to Israel after fulfilling their objective. Okay. So we have one question about the angels. We've put that to one side. And we've actually said, you know what? There's another halachic difference between in Israel and out in Israel. And that is for every one of us. If we live in Israel, we're not allowed to leave. And as the Rambam is explained by the Kesef Mishnah, no one is allowed to leave permanently. We always have to have in mind to be coming back. So now there's an interesting Gemara in Kiddushin that tells us that there is another example or reason that one may leave Eretz Yisrael that's not even listed in the Gemara, but it's obvious that it's allowed. And we're going to notice that this is allowed, and it didn't even have to be mentioned. What are we talking about? So it's a bit of a long-winded Talmudic story, but here's the story. Rav Asi had an elderly mother whom he left behind when he moved to the land of Israel, probably in Babel. After settling in Israel, he heard she was coming to join him. He came to Rabbi Yochanan, who was the chief rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, and asked, may I leave Israel for the diaspora? Rabbi Yochanan replied, it's forbidden. Halacha is not allowed. Rav Asi then clarifies his question. Is it different if I'm going to greet my mother? Rabbi Yochanan replied, Asi, you want to go? May Hashem bring you back in peace. Of course you should go. And that's what Rav Asi did. Rav Asi left Israel to visit his elder mother, which some commentators understand as permitting travel abroad to honor one's parents. Okay, that would be another reason. But actually, the Meiri says, it is permissible to leave Israel for the diaspora to greet one's father, mother, or to perform any act of honor. He extends it further. Honoring one's parents or honoring somebody that needs to be honored would be another reason that doesn't have to be mentioned, but is certainly allowed to leave. Honoring one's parents is not included in Maimonides' list of exemptions for leaving Israel. And those who want to say this, say that this omission, it does not consider it a valid reason. But Rav Asi didn't leave Israel for personal reasons. He traveled through the diaspora to bring his mother back to Israel. He wasn't going to honor the way the Rambam understands the Gemara is. He was allowed to leave, and the reason why Rambam doesn't mention this because he wasn't actually leaving to go and spend time outside of Israel. He was leaving Israel in order to bring more people back home. And in this case, to bring his parents, his mother back home. His journey was always toward Israel. And as the plane took off from Ben Gurion Airport, he wasn't any planes, there wasn't Ben Gurion then. So it must have been as his camel or his horse or his donkey traveled away from Israel, it looked like he was traveling away. Really, he was traveling toward Israel, not away from it. He never truly left. It was a journey of coming back to Israel. And that doesn't have to be mentioned because that's obvious that that's allowed. And that's what Rav Asi's story was according to the Rambam. What do we have here? The purpose defines the journey. When you travel for Israel, even if you're traveling away from the land, but it's for Israel, Israel goes with you. And therefore you haven't left. You're on your journey back. We're going to say this concept, which is a halachic concept, it's very important for us to remember. We can't leave Israel for no reason. But if we're leaving Israel in order to bring back to Israel, that's considered staying in Israel. Israel comes with you. Okay? Vayeitzei says the Sicha, the angels from Israel left Israel to escort Yaakov back to Israel. So although Israeli angels in the beginning of the Parshah told you cannot leave, go up the ladder, bring down different angels who can leave because they're the out of Israel angels. But when it's time for the end of the Parshah, Yaakov's coming home, then we don't say you can't leave, go back up the ladder. We say go out, because going out right now is part of coming back. Bring Yaakov back in. With us, there was no prohibition against leaving, and that's why the angels were able to greet Yaakov outside of Israel, because it was part of being inside of Israel. Amazing. Interesting. Let's read this on the screen. When Yaakov left Israel, the angels couldn't accompany him because they're bound to the Holy Land. But on his return, the angels were allowed to leave Israel to escort him back. And this becomes the entranceway for us to understand such an important window into what happens in our life, and in particular, going back to our opening question, how to deal with challenges, spanners in the work, things that mess up our plans. And we're going to learn from the fact that the angels are being told, get out there. Because although Israel's here, right now, if you go out there, that's also Israel. And we're going to learn that the challenges that seem to be taking us away from where we planned to be and what we think we should be doing are actually extensions of what we should be doing. Like the angels are going to be outside the border of Israel, but it's an extension of Eretz Yisrael. Put this on the screen. Our detours in life are often Hashem's direct path. They look like a detour. This guy's ended up on top of the hill. He was trying to go straight down the road. For some reason, he's going out Shvat Yarn. Yaakov's journey was about building the future of the Jewish people, and the path to build the future of the Jewish people took him to a place he would never have dreamt of going. But that was the direct path of Hashem, and that was the challenge, which is part of the straightest way forward. And the angels come with. Let's read this inside. The Gemara says, interesting build-up. Just bear with me because this is a bit Talmudic, but I think it's not going to be so hard to follow and connect the dots. Rabbi Elazar said the only reason Hashem exiled the Jewish people among the nations was for them to be joined by converts. Why do we have exile? Because when we go down to exile, it attracts converts. The Torah says, I will plant the Jews in the earth for my sake. The only reason one plants a small measure of seeds is to harvest many bushels of grain. You take a handful of precious seed and dump it into the ground because you know the net result is going to be much more than one handful of seeds. This single handful of seeds, when planted, will bring forth bushels of grain. The same thing, Yiddish people are thrown into exile, were planted into distant places, and that returns tremendous returns. The problem with this little text from the Gemara is that actually we're told we're not supposed to encourage conversion. Because actually, in order for a convert to become a ger tzedek, they have to be so determined, and that weeds out the real ones. Sorry, weeds out the non-real ones, and it leaves us with the real ones, the ger tzedek. So going down to exile in order to have converts doesn't really match our reality. Every Yiddish convert is so precious, far and few in between. What does it mean we go down to Golis just to have converts? So the way we understand it is as follows. God dispersed among the nations to help us find the precious souls embedded among them. And that does work. But exile is not punishment, but deliberate act of our growth. It makes sure that those who have to grow are able to grow in the most precious way by planting us. But the question is, what is our purpose in exile if we don't facilitate conversions? Because Yiddishkeit tells us and discourages us from encouraging conversion. And the answer is fascinating read from the Rebbe Rashab. The idea is, when Adam was driven from the Garden of Eden after sinning with the forbidden fruit, many souls and sacred sparks fell below to a space of fragmentation and division. That's what happens when we do the wrong thing. Godly energy is robbed from its peaceful alignment and ends up all over the place. And when Adam, the first man, sinned, the mess was enormous. God exiles us among the nations to extract these souls and sparks. When dispersed amongst the nations, we can repair the sparks that fell among those nations. When we are exiled to a country under the aegis of its ministering angels, all the children born to us receive Jewish souls because they're Jewish children, but they get Jewish souls that were embedded in that nation and its archangel. So if I was born in England, I'm as Jewish as Moshe, but my soul brings out English sparks, British, I don't know if it's English, why not? Since Adam's sin, when everything shattered, there are sparks here, and just by the mere fact that we live here an upright Yiddish life, and we create goodness in this country, that unleashes, realigns the trapped sparks from way back when in the here and now, and those are called converts, because we are converting, we are transforming those sparks back to where they really belong. This is the deeper meaning of our sage's statement. Jews who were dispersed amongst the nations and be joined by converts. The statement refers more broadly to all souls and sparks that are born to us while dispersed amongst the nations. Fascinating. From the Rebbe Rashab. They are called converts because they come from a distant foreign space and are drawn back to holiness, transformed, converted. When a Jewish child is born in exile, a spark formerly embedded in our host nation enters the Jewish body to serve Hashem through Torah, study, and prayer for 70 years, 80 years, 120 years. It is similar to someone who converts and takes refuge under the wings of Hashem's sheltering presence. It lends so much importance to every one of us as we are in distant places away from the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. So the answer to why, what are we doing here outside of Israel if we're not looking for converts, is because we're looking for converts on a different level. Of course, a real ger tzedek is tremendously precious, but even less than that, even when we just have a child, even when we just do a mitzvah, even when we just learn Torah whilst we are here in Great Britain, learning on Zoom together, we are unleashing and realigning godly sparks from the times of Adam Arisha. That's what's going on right here. This refers to the soul of Jewish children born in Asher. We will find divine sparks. As they grow and perform holy deeds, these sparks return to their rightful place. Like converts reunited with the Jewish people. Okay, so now The sparks that we create and uncover in exile are like spiritual pockets of Israel in the diaspora. The way the Tzemach Tzedek phrased it is, Machda Eretz Yisrael. Transform this pocket of Manchester, of Great Britain, of Europe, which is far away from Israel. But because we are unleashing and realigning right here, we've created a mini Israel right here in our room. And this is what it means. Hashem sends us to different places in the world to create mini Israels. Create little spaces of holiness, pockets of Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora. Says the Sikha, now we can better understand why there are two groups of angels. The first group of angels are the angels that are there to protect us and they're with us from before we start. But once we start making transformation, the Israeli angels, the holy angels, the Malachei HaKodesh, come and join us inside our pocket of mini Eretz Yisrael. There are two types of angels. When Yaakov travels to Aram Naraim, angels from the Israel accompanied him to Israel to empower him for the task that lay ahead of him in the diaspora. The angels that came to greet him upon his return were created by Yaakov's success in transforming the diaspora into a pocket of Israel. Now, because Yaakov has successfully created an Israeli pocket, a holiness, a holy land pocket in Chutz La'aretz, these were permitted to enter the diaspora because Yaakov transformed it into a mini Israel by drawing Israel's sanctity into the diaspora. This we need to know. We're at the stage right now that our mitzvahs, our connection, our head-on dealing with and working with our little challenges are not only surviving the challenges, we are transforming our little pocket, our little circle into a mini Eretz Yisrael. And that's why the holiest malachim are drawn in to be able to empower us much more, be effective. So, the way we now understand why these angels have come out to greet Yaakov, the simple understanding is because we're headed home. And therefore they come out and they're allowed to bring us home because that's part of getting to Eretz Yisrael. The deeper understanding is they're allowed to come here because heading home means we are already transforming pockets of Eretz Yisrael. That's where we are up to. Yaakov transformed the diaspora into a pocket of Israel, and therefore the Malachim were allowed to cross the border and meet him because they entered the holy space created by Yaakov and his family. This is what's going on in our life. Because as the Rebbe tells us, we are the generation of Geula. We are the generation that are going to hear that big shofar, Tekah b'shofar gadol. And we are going to live with Geula. And as we come in for the home run, we can be sure, not only does Hashem send malachim to be with us, but these are malachim of Eretz Yisrael. Because our good work in the here and now are transforming our reality to be mini Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, what we should tell ourselves next time we have a challenge, how do we overcome the challenge? Number one is we should know Hashem never sends us on our own. When Yaakov leaves the Holy Land to go out, Hashem tells him, do not be afraid, I will be with you. Hashem sends divine protection. Hashem sends angels with us wherever we go to protect and empower us on life's journey, and that was true throughout history. But it's more. Now we can tell ourselves, number two, be tachim. Trust in Hashem. When we follow the path Hashem has set for us, we receive His strength to overcome challenges. So important. But there's one more step, and that is to remember that the reason we ended up with this challenge in the first place is because we are going to transform it. This is the most meaningful, purposeful thing we can do. Find meaning in the challenge itself. Hardships are the opportunity not to test us and see whether we fail or not, to see whether we're tough or weak. Hashem doesn't need to test us to see whether we're tough or weak. Chas v'shalom. What sort of unkindness would that look like? No. The reason why we are put through a challenge is because this is our opportunity to transform a piece of the tough diaspora and to turn it into a mini Eretz Yisrael. Expand their holiness and fulfills Hashem's plans. And this is not only a silver lining to a challenging situation, it is the exact purpose, the reason why this challenge was orchestrated. And we should bear that in mind. Yaakov's journey shows us that every twist in the road is divinely charted, and every challenge holds a spark waiting for you to uncover, and the Israeli angels are here to cheer us on, because we are making Machta Eretz Yisrael, many pockets of Eretz Yisrael. Hashem should give us the koyach, and we shouldn't need the challenges. Instead, we should be able to say, look, we are back home already now, maybe now, speedy nowadays, b'mheira v'yameinu mamish. So don't forget to make sure you're celebrating this Shabbos and keep reminding ourselves those three things. Hashem is always with us. Bitachon is super powerful, and we are creating many pockets of Eretz Yisrael, particularly in the diaspora. Yeshakayach, thank you for joining. Same time, same place next week. Sei gesund, a good week, and a good Yom Tov.
Bye.
Amen.
Thank you.
And you.
Thank you.